I never imagined the day would come when I'd find myself standing outside a hotel room, my heart pounding as muffled laughter seeped through the door. After 3.5 years of marriage, the woman I trusted most was on the other side of that door. With someone else. I didn't knock, I didn't confront her. Instead, I made a choice that would change everything. I walked away, quietly packing up my life and leaving her betrayal behind. But before we dive deeper into the story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. Kathy slammed her coffee cup onto the table, the porcelain clinking sharply against the wood. She had rehearsed this moment for weeks, imagining every possible reaction Chad might have. But this cold, almost indifferent stare, it was maddening. "Damn it, Chad, don't you care?" Her voice cracked, her frustration spilling over like an unsteady dam. Chad didn't even flinch. He sat back in his chair, folding the newspaper with deliberate care. His calm demeanor felt like a slap to her face, more insulting than any outburst could have been. When he finally spoke, his tone was measured, like he was discussing the weather instead of their crumbling marriage. "I stopped caring when you stopped being a wife." The words cut deep, sharper than Kathy expected. She opened her mouth to retort, but the lump in her throat silenced her. His gaze met hers, unwavering, like he'd been waiting years to say those exact words. "Shut up. What the hell is that supposed to mean?" she demanded, masking her unease with anger. Chad leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. For the first time, there was a flicker of something behind his eyes. Not anger, not sadness, but something colder. Resignation. "It means," he said slowly, "that I've spent the last year watching you lie to my face, watching you play house while sneaking off to meet someone else. And you know what, Kathy? I don't even care anymore." "So, congratulations. You win. You can leave now." Kathy's breath caught. This wasn't the Chad she knew, the one who avoided conflict, who bent over backward to keep the peace. This man in front of her was a stranger, and that realization unsettled her more than anything else. "You think you're so high and mighty," she shot back, her voice trembling. "You're not perfect either, Chad. Don't act like you didn't play a part in this." But he didn't take the bait. Instead, he stood up, his movements as deliberate as his words. "Maybe I did," he said, walking toward the door. "But the difference is, I never pretended to be someone I wasn't. Have a nice life, Kathy." And with that, he left the room, leaving Kathy standing there, stunned and alone, her carefully crafted world beginning to crack around her. As the door clicked shut behind him, Chad exhaled slowly, his breath steady, his mind already calculating the next steps. This wasn't impulsive. He had prepared for this moment for months, and now it was time to set his plan into motion. First, he grabbed his laptop from the office. The early morning quiet of the house was broken only by the rhythmic clicks of his keyboard as he logged into their shared bank accounts. Chad's expression didn't waver as he moved money from their joint savings into his private account, one transaction after another. He left just enough behind to keep the accounts active, but not enough for Kathy to do any damage. Next, he turned to the credit cards. With precise efficiency, he canceled every shared card, ensuring Kathy couldn't rack up more debt in his name. He made a mental note to monitor their statements in case she tried something before the updates took effect. Transitioning seamlessly, Chad shifted to his investments. He sold off a few underperforming stocks he had earmarked earlier, consolidating his finances further. As the transactions processed, he leaned back, letting a brief wave of satisfaction wash over him. It wasn't revenge, it was self-preservation. Why now? The thought flickered in his mind unbidden as he stared at the confirmation emails piling up in his inbox. For years he had tolerated Kathy's coldness, her lies, the growing distance between them. He'd made excuses for her, convincing himself that things would get better. But the truth? The truth had hit him like a freight train the day he found those photos. Tyrone's smug grin, Kathy's familiar smile, the one she hadn't shown him in years. He'd held on for too long, he realized, not out of love, but out of a desperate need to prove that he hadn't wasted a decade of his life. Letting go was harder than he ever imagined, but now that the moment had come, it felt strangely liberating. Chad closed his laptop and reached for his phone. A quick call to his lawyer, Alex, confirmed the next steps. Divorce papers would be filed by the end of the week. Alex had been prepped months ago, and with the evidence Chad provided, the case was all but sealed. Infidelity didn't sit well with most judges in their state, especially not when paired with financial misconduct. As the call ended, Chad paused for a moment, staring out the window at the neatly trimmed lawn he'd maintained for years. Everything about this life, this house, felt like a lie now. But that was fine. He could rebuild, piece by piece. He'd done it before. Finally, he logged out of every shared streaming service, changed the Wi-Fi password, and deleted Kathy's access to the grocery delivery account. A petty move, perhaps, but it was symbolic. His way of taking back control of every corner of his life. By the time Kathy returned to the living room hours later, her access to his world had been severed entirely. Chad was gone, and so was everything she had once taken for granted. It had all started with a nagging feeling Chad couldn't shake. Kathy's late nights, the sudden distance in her eyes when she looked at him. It was subtle at first, but it grew louder with each passing week. Instead of confronting her outright, Chad had chosen another route. He needed certainty, not speculation. The memory played vividly in his mind. A dingy office, the kind you'd expect from a man in the business of uncovering secrets. Chad sat stiffly across from the private investigator, a wiry man with sharp eyes and a sharper voice. The faint scent of stale coffee hung in the air as the investigator slid a folder across the desk. "She's been meeting him at motels for months," the man said, his voice devoid of sympathy. "Different locations, but always the same guy, Tyrone. Here's the proof." Chad hesitated before opening the folder. When he finally did, the images were undeniable. Kathy walking arm in arm with another man, her laughter caught mid-moment, the two of them entering a motel room together. Each photo felt like a punch to his gut, but Chad remained stoic, refusing to let his anger show. "I didn't want to believe it," Chad said quietly, his voice steadier than he felt. "They always say that," the investigator replied, leaning back in his chair, "but people don't hire me unless they already know. I'm just the confirmation." Transitioning from disbelief to resolution, Chad folded the folder shut. He slid it into his briefcase and nodded. "Thanks. That's all I need." The investigator raised an eyebrow. "Most guys would blow up, confront her, maybe even kick her out the same day. You sure you're not going to, do something drastic?" Chad allowed himself a tight smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "No, I'm going to wait. Timing is everything." The investigator shrugged, clearly disinterested in Chad's reasoning. "Your call. Just don't let it eat at you too long. Secrets like this have a way of festering." As Chad left the office, the folder tucked securely under his arm, his mind raced with possibilities. Every instinct screamed at him to confront Kathy, to demand answers, to make her face the consequences. But he knew better. An emotional reaction would give her the upper hand. If he wanted to walk away with his dignity and his assets intact, he needed a strategy. Over the following weeks, Chad played the part of the oblivious husband. He greeted Kathy with the same measured tone, kept their routine intact, and even planned a few date nights. It wasn't easy. Every smile she faked, every excuse she gave, chipped away at him. But he held firm, knowing that patience was his greatest weapon. In hindsight, he realized that waiting wasn't just about preparation, it was about control. By biding his time, Chad reclaimed the power Kathy had stolen. And when the day finally came to confront her, he would be ready. Later that evening, Chad sat on the porch, nursing a glass of whiskey as the sun dipped below the horizon. The day's events weighed heavy on him, though his expression betrayed none of it. The sound of soft footsteps on the gravel driveway broke his thoughts. Turning his head, he saw Maria approaching, her arms folded against the evening chill. Maria had always been a comforting presence. A friend, a neighbor, someone who seemed to understand Chad better than most. Tonight, there was a hint of hesitation in her steps, as though she were unsure of how to approach the storm she sensed brewing. "Hey," she said gently, her voice warm but cautious. "I saw Kathy leave earlier. Is everything okay?" Chad exhaled sharply, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. "Let's just say she made her choice and I made mine." Maria nodded, leaning against the porch railing. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, but it was charged, filled with words unsaid. Finally, Maria broke it, her voice soft but steady. "You deserve better, Chad, someone who actually sees you." The sincerity in her tone caught him off guard. He glanced at her, and for the first time, noticed the way her gaze lingered, filled with something deeper than concern. "Maria," he began, unsure of where the conversation was headed, but she cut him off with a small, knowing smile. "You don't have to say anything, just don't let this break you, okay?" As she turned to leave, Chad watched her go, a flicker of something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. For the first time in a long time, he felt truly seen. The next morning, Chad found Kathy pacing the living room, her arms crossed tightly. The tension in the air was palpable, the kind that weighed heavy and pressed against the walls. As soon as he entered, her head snapped toward him, her eyes flashing with anger. "We need to talk," she said, her voice sharp and accusatory. Chad sighed, leaning casually against the doorway. "Go ahead, I'm listening." Kathy's jaw tightened. "I'm not leaving, Chad. This house is half mine, whether you like it or not." A bitter laugh escaped him before he could stop it. "Half yours? Fine. Then you can have half the mortgage too. How does that sound?" Her face flushed with indignation. "Don't you dare twist this around on me. You think you can just cut me out of everything? The accounts, the cards? What are you even trying to prove?" Chad stepped forward, his calm demeanor unnerving. "I'm not trying to prove anything, Kathy. I'm just done. You want half the house? Go ahead. But you'll pay for it, just like I have for the past 10 years. And you can pay for the utilities, the maintenance, and the repairs too." Her voice rose, the anger spilling out in waves. "You're being petty. You can't just erase me like this." Chad shook his head slowly, his tone growing colder. "Petty? Petty would have been throwing your things out the second I found out about Tyrone. But I didn't. I gave you time. I let you keep pretending this life was yours to ruin. Not anymore." Kathy's defiance faltered, her shoulders stiffening as she tried to regain control. "You don't have the right to treat me like this. I've put just as much into this house as you have." He crossed his arms, his gaze unwavering. "You're right. You did put something in. Deception. Lies. Infidelity. Tell me, Kathy, how much of that adds to the property value?" Her mouth opened to retort, but no words came. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Chad's steady breathing. Finally, Kathy spun on her heel, muttering under her breath as she stormed out of the room. Chad watched her go, his expression impassive. The fight wasn't over, but he knew one thing for certain. This was the beginning of the end. Later that evening, Chad sat at the dining table, his fingers drumming against the wood. Kathy stood across from him, arms crossed, her expression a mix of frustration and defiance. The tension between them was razor sharp, and Chad knew it was time to cut through the lies once and for all. "You really think this is just about Tyrone, don't you?" he said, breaking the silence. Kathy narrowed her eyes. "What are you talking about?" Chad leaned forward, his tone low but unwavering. "I'm talking about the other men, the ones before him. You think I didn't notice, Kathy? You think I've been blind all these years?" Her expression flickered, just for a moment, but she quickly masked it with indignation. "You're delusional. There were no other men. You're making things up to justify your cold behavior." Chad let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "I stayed silent the first 3 times. Not anymore." Kathy's composure wavered as Chad pulled a small stack of photos from a folder on the table and slid them toward her. She hesitated before picking them up, her hands trembling slightly. The images told the story she was trying so desperately to deny. Hotel lobbies, lingering glances, unmistakable intimacy with different men, survival skills, trial by fire. This doesn't mean anything, she stammered, her voice rising in pitch. You're twisting things. These could be anyone, friends, co-workers. Save it, Chad cut her off, his voice cold. The first one? I thought it was a mistake. The late business dinners, the canceled plans. I gave you the benefit of the doubt. The second one? I convinced myself it was a rough patch, that we could fix things. By the third, I realized you didn't care about fixing anything. Kathy's face paled, her words caught in her throat. You never said anything. Because I wanted to believe you were better than this, he said, his gaze piercing, but every time I forgave, you gave me another reason not to. Do you even know what it's like to feel invisible in your own marriage? To watch the person you love lie to your face and pretend everything is fine. Tears welled in Kathy's eyes, but Chad wasn't moved. You don't get to cry now, he said, his voice steady. This isn't about your guilt or your excuses. This is about accountability. She dropped the photos back on the table, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I didn't mean for it to happen, she whispered. Any of it. Chad shook his head, standing up and pushing his chair back. You didn't mean for it to happen? That's your excuse? You didn't mean to betray me over and over again? You didn't mean to destroy our marriage? Kathy sobbed quietly, unable to meet his gaze. But Chad was done. He turned away, his voice firm as he delivered the final blow. Intentions don't matter, Kathy. Actions do. And yours have consequences. The following evening, Chad sat on his porch again, the soft glow of the setting sun casting long shadows over the yard. His mind was a storm of thoughts, swirling with the aftermath of the confrontation with Kathy. Just as he was about to retreat inside, he heard the familiar crunch of gravel underfoot. Maria approached cautiously, her steps lighter than the weight she carried. In her hands was a small plate covered with a cloth. I thought you could use something warm, she said, her voice gentle but steady. She held the plate out, offering a small, tentative smile. Chad accepted it with a nod, setting it down on the table beside him. Thanks, Maria, you didn't have to. I know, she replied, sitting down on the step beside him. For a moment, silence stretched between them, comfortable yet charged. Then, Maria took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for something difficult. Chad, she began, her voice quieter now, I've been watching you carry this burden for so long. You've always been the strong one, keeping everything together, even when no one noticed. But you don't have to do it alone anymore. He turned to her, his brows furrowing slightly. Maria? She raised a hand, cutting him off gently. Let me finish. Her tone was soft but insistent, her eyes shining with sincerity. You're worth fighting for, Chad. Let me prove it. Her words hung in the air, vulnerable and raw. Chad looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. There was no pretense in her expression, no hesitation in her gaze. She wasn't offering pity. She was offering hope. Maria, he said finally, his voice quieter than he intended, I'm not sure I'm ready for whatever this is. She nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. I'm not asking for anything right now. I just want you to know that when you're ready, I'll be here. No pressure, no expectations. Her honesty disarmed him, breaking through the walls he'd built to protect himself. For the first time in months, maybe years, he felt something stir within him, something close to hope. Thank you, he said simply, his voice steady, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to smile, just a little. The morning after Kathy's latest outburst, Chad found himself sitting in the sleek, modern office of his lawyer, Alex. The faint hum of the air conditioning filled the room as Alex reviewed the folder Chad had handed him, his expression growing more focused with each page. Alex finally leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against his desk. You've got a strong case here, Chad, he said. The evidence of infidelity, financial misconduct, and now her recent behavior, this is all working in your favor. Chad nodded, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. I don't just want the divorce, Alex. I need to make sure she doesn't drag this out or try to bleed me dry. Alex gave a knowing smile. Don't worry, we'll make sure she doesn't take you for more than she deserves. I'll draft the papers and file them today. With what you've given me, this should move quickly. Shifting gears, Chad leaned forward. And about the restraining order, I want to make sure she can't come back and cause more damage. Alex's expression turned serious. We've got enough to justify filing for one. The footage of her destroying your property is clear-cut evidence. Combine that with the threats and erratic behavior you've described, and the court should grant it without hesitation. Chad felt a small measure of relief, though the weight of everything still pressed heavily on him. I just want this to end, Alex. I'm done playing games. Alex nodded firmly. And it will end. But we're going to do it the right way. No loose ends. No chances for her to turn this around on you. As Alex began outlining the next steps, Chad listened intently. The process was straightforward. Divorce papers would be served immediately, accompanied by the request for the restraining order. If Kathy contested it, the court would review the evidence, which was heavily in Chad's favor. Alex's confidence was reassuring, but Chad couldn't help the lingering unease in the pit of his stomach. He had seen how unpredictable Kathy could be when cornered. By the time the meeting wrapped up, Chad had signed the necessary documents and left the office with a renewed sense of determination. Outside, the cool breeze hit his face as he stepped onto the busy street. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he was regaining control, not just of the situation, but of his life. Later that afternoon, Alex called with an update. The papers have been served and the restraining order is in process. If she tries anything, Chad, don't hesitate to call the police. You've got the law on your side now. Chad thanked him and hung up, staring out the window of his office. There was still a long road ahead, but at least now he had a plan, and he wasn't navigating it alone. The pieces were finally starting to fall into place, and Kathy's grip on his life was loosening with every passing moment. It was a quiet afternoon when Chad first heard Tyrone's side of the story. The two men sat across from each other at a small cafe, the tension thick but oddly civil. Tyrone, visibly uncomfortable, stirred his coffee absent-mindedly before finally speaking. She told me you were abusive, Tyrone said, his voice heavy with regret. That you controlled her. She made it sound like she was trapped in some horrible situation, and I believed her lies. Chad's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent, letting Tyrone continue. At first, it was just little things she'd say in passing. Complaints about how cold you were, how you never listened to her. Then it escalated. Stories about arguments, about you yelling at her, even threatening her. He paused, shaking his head. She had me convinced she was a victim, Chad. That's why I didn't question anything when we started seeing each other. Tyrone met Chad's gaze then, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and frustration. But now, looking back, I see it for what it was. She used me, played on my sympathy to justify what she was doing. Chad exhaled slowly, his hands tightening around his coffee cup. I figured as much. She's always been good at spinning a story. Fill in our pockets. I'm sorry, Tyrone said, his voice sincere, for believing her, for being part of it. Chad nodded, his expression unreadable. It's not your fault she's a liar, but it doesn't excuse what either of you did. The weight of Tyrone's confession hung between them, a stark reminder of just how far Kathy had gone to manipulate everyone in her life. The house was eerily silent when Chad arrived home, the kind of silence that felt wrong. Stepping inside, he immediately noticed the shattered vase in the entryway, shards of glass scattered across the floor like jagged confetti. His heart sank, but he remained calm, methodically surveying the damage as he moved from room to room. The living room bore the brunt of Kathy's rage. The couch cushions had been slashed, their stuffing spilling out in messy piles. Picture frames lay face down or broken, their memories now tangled with fragments of glass. In the kitchen, cabinet doors hung open, pots and pans strewn across the floor, and a chair lay on its side. Chad stood still for a moment, taking it all in. It wasn't just destruction. It was deliberate. Calculated chaos meant to send a message. Shaking his head, he pulled out his phone and opened the app for the house's security system. The live feed was calm now, but the recorded footage told a different story. On the screen, Kathy could be seen storming into the house hours earlier. Her movements were frantic, her anger palpable, as she knocked over furniture and hurled objects with reckless abandon. She screamed at no one in particular, her words unintelligible, but filled with fury. She thought she could get away with it, Chad muttered under his breath as he hit save on the footage, ensuring it was backed up for the authorities. Without hesitation, he dialed the police. When the dispatcher answered, Chad's tone was measured but firm. "I'd like to report a violation of a restraining order. There's security footage of the incident, and I'd like to file charges." As he hung up, he couldn't help but feel a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. Kathy's actions had crossed a line, and this time, there would be consequences. When the officers arrived, Chad handed over the footage without a word, letting the images speak for themselves. As they reviewed the evidence, one of the officers nodded grimly. "We'll take it from here, sir. She won't be bothering you again anytime soon." Chad watched them leave, a faint sense of closure settling over him. Kathy's meltdown was just another chapter in the saga, but at least now, the law was on his side. A week after Kathy's arrest, Chad was finishing his morning coffee when his phone buzzed with an unexpected message. It was from Tyrone, asking to meet. Against his better judgment, Chad agreed. Curiosity outweighed resentment, and he wanted closure to this tangled mess. Later that afternoon, the two men sat across from each other at a quiet diner. Tyrone looked noticeably uncomfortable, his hands fidgeting with the edge of a napkin. Chad, on the other hand, exuded a calm indifference, his arms crossed as he waited for Tyrone to speak. "I owe you an apology," Tyrone started, his voice low but sincere. "For everything. I didn't know she was married, Chad. If I had, I swear I would have walked away the moment I found out." Chad raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. "And yet, here we are." Tyrone nodded, the weight of his guilt evident in his expression. "I believed her lies. She told me you were abusive, controlling. She painted this picture of a man who didn't care about her. I fell for it, and I'm sorry." Chad studied him for a moment before responding. "At least you're honest about it now. That's more than she's ever been." The conversation paused, the silence heavy but not entirely hostile. Then, Tyrone reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope, sliding it across the table. "What's this?" Chad asked, his tone cautious. "It's yours," Tyrone said simply. "Your lottery ticket. She gave it to me a while back, claiming it was some gift she didn't want you to know about. I didn't think much of it until recently, but when I checked, Chad, it's a winner. A big one." Chad blinked, his composure briefly cracking. "You're serious?" Tyrone nodded. "Dead serious. I couldn't keep it. Not after everything. It's yours, fair and square." For the first time, Chad was genuinely speechless. He opened the envelope and saw the ticket, his mind racing. He hadn't even remembered buying it, but now the implications were staggering. "Why?" Chad finally asked, his voice quieter. "Why give it back?" Tyrone sighed. "Because I was a part of Kathy's mess, and I don't want to be anymore. I've made enough mistakes, but keeping that ticket would have been the worst one. But Tyrone raised his eyebrow but declined to further the conversation. Chad sat back, a mix of emotions swirling within him. He felt vindicated, shocked, and oddly grateful. He extended his hand toward Tyrone, who hesitated before shaking it. "Thanks," Chad said, his tone measured, "for doing the right thing. Eventually." The doctor cracked a smile before continuing. As Tyrone left the diner, Chad stared at the ticket, a small but significant symbol of his new beginning. For once, life seemed to be tipping the scales back in his favor. The courtroom was quiet, the air heavy with anticipation as Chad sat at the plaintiff's table beside Alex, his lawyer. Across the room, Kathy fidgeted nervously, her own attorney whispering hurriedly in her ear. The judge, a stern man with sharp features, entered and called the session to order. Alex began confidently, laying out Chad's case with precision. "Your Honor, we have clear evidence of infidelity, financial misconduct, and destruction of property on the part of the defendant. My client has acted in good faith throughout this ordeal, but it's clear that the defendant has not." He proceeded to present the evidence. Photos from the private investigator, financial records showing Kathy's unauthorized spending, and, most damning, the security footage of her rampage through the house. Each piece painted a vivid picture of her actions, leaving little room for rebuttal. Kathy's lawyer attempted to shift the narrative, leaning heavily on emotional appeals. "Your Honor, my client has been under immense stress. Her actions, while regrettable, were driven by emotional turmoil. She's deeply remorseful and seeks a fair resolution." Kathy dabbed her eyes with a tissue, her tears seemingly genuine, but the judge remained unmoved. His expression hardened as he turned toward her. Kathy turned to the witness box. "Why did you try this trial?" "Mr. Carter," the judge said, his voice firm, "remorse does not absolve accountability. The evidence presented here is irrefutable. Actions have consequences, and it's clear you have acted with reckless disregard for your husband and your shared property." Kathy's face paled, her sobs quieting as the weight of the judge's words sank in. When Alex delivered his closing argument, it was calm and decisive. "Your Honor, my client is not seeking vengeance. He's seeking fairness. After years of betrayal and dishonesty, he deserves to walk away with what is rightfully his, free from undue financial burden." The judge nodded, his decision swift. "I'm ruling in favor of the plaintiff. Mr. Carter will retain ownership of the marital home and his personal assets. The defendant is not entitled to alimony, given her actions. Furthermore, the restraining order remains in effect. This court stands adjourned." As the gavel struck, Chad exhaled deeply, the tension leaving his body for the first time in weeks. Alex turned to him with a small, triumphant smile. The judge didn't buy her sob story. Justice at last. Chad glanced across the room, where Kathy sat frozen in disbelief. He felt no triumph, only relief. The fight was over, and he had won. Not out of spite, but out of the need to reclaim his life. Walking out of the courtroom, Chad felt the sun on his face and the weight of the past lifting from his shoulders. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was the start of something new. The weeks following the court's decision were unkind to Kathy. Stripped of any alimony and forced to vacate the marital home, she was left scrambling for a sense of stability. Her new reality came crashing down hard. The life she once commanded with confidence had crumbled beneath her. At first, Kathy tried to maintain the facade of independence. She rented a small apartment in the city, barely managing the monthly payments with the savings she had left. But her financial woes only deepened. Without Chad's income to fall back on, the bills piled up quickly. Credit card debt, overdue rent, and the cost of the lifestyle she had grown accustomed to but could no longer afford. Unable to keep up, Kathy finally faced the harsh truth. She had no choice but to return to her parents' modest suburban home. The move was a quiet affair, done under the cover of night to avoid the prying eyes of neighbors who once envied her seemingly perfect life. Her childhood bedroom, once a symbol of innocence and hope, now felt suffocating. The queen of her castle reduced to a guest in her childhood home, surrounded by pastel wallpaper and outdated furniture that mocked the grandeur she had lost. The reality of her downfall hit hardest during awkward family dinners. Her parents, well-meaning but wary, asked polite questions about her plans. Kathy, who had always relished being the center of attention, found herself shrinking under their pitying gazes. "I'll figure it out," she muttered one evening, poking at her plate of reheated casserole, but even she didn't believe her own words. Meanwhile, her attempts to rebuild relationships proved fruitless. Tyrone, who had already distanced himself after her lies were exposed, refused her calls. Former friends, who once flocked to her for advice and entertainment, had moved on. Kathy was left isolated, her social circle as hollow as the promises she had once made. For the first time in years, she had to face herself without distraction or deflection. The mirror no longer reflected the confident, glamorous woman she used to be. It showed someone humbled, broken, and unsure of where to turn next. In the weeks following the legal battle, Chad found solace in Maria's unwavering presence. She never pushed, never demanded more than he was ready to give. Instead, she simply showed up, whether it was with a home-cooked meal, a quick check-in text, or a quiet moment shared on the porch. One evening, as the sky shifted into shades of orange and pink, Chad found himself opening up to her in a way he hadn't with anyone in years. "It's strange," he admitted, his voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. "For so long, I felt like I was going through the motions, like I was invisible." Maria leaned forward, her hand resting lightly on his. "You're not invisible, Chad. You never were. You just didn't have someone who saw you the way you deserved." Her words struck a chord deep within him. For the first time in years, he felt like someone truly cared, not because of obligation or convenience, but because they genuinely wanted to. As the evening stretched on, Maria's sincerity became impossible to ignore. Her kindness wasn't performative. It was genuine, steady, and healing. In her, Chad began to see not just a friend, but the possibility of something more. A new chapter that felt promising rather than daunting. End of section 8. Read. This recording is in the public domain. For more information, visit iTunes, Stitcher, or Spotify. 6 months later, Chad sat in the quiet conference room at Alex's law office, the final divorce papers spread out before him. The air was still, almost heavy, but Chad felt an unexpected lightness. This moment, one he had dreaded for so long, now felt like the final step in a journey toward freedom. Across the table, Kathy sat with her lawyer, her demeanor subdued. Gone was the fiery defiance that had fueled their earlier confrontations. She barely looked at him, her gaze fixed on the document in front of her. The terms were clear. Chad would retain the house and the majority of his assets, while Kathy would walk away with minimal financial support, just enough to cover basic necessities for a limited time. Her previous demands for spousal support had been denied outright, thanks to the irrefutable evidence of her misconduct. "Is everything in order?" Alex asked, his voice breaking the silence. Chad nodded, reaching for the pen. "It's exactly what we agreed on." He signed his name with steady hands, each stroke of the pen feeling like a weight lifted from his shoulders. Kathy followed suit, though her movements were slower, reluctant. When she finally put the pen down, it was as if the room itself exhaled. "It's done," Alex said, sliding the papers into a folder. "You're officially free." Kathy glanced at Chad for the first time, her expression unreadable. "I guess this is goodbye." Chad met her gaze, his own steady and unwavering. "Goodbye, Kathy. Take care of yourself." With that, he stood, nodding to Alex before walking out of the room. The sun was bright as he stepped outside, its warmth a stark contrast to the coldness of the past few months. For the first time in years, he felt untethered, no longer burdened by the weight of a failing marriage or the manipulations that came with it. As he drove away, he allowed himself a small smile. The chapter was finally closed. He had signed the papers and walked away for good, leaving the past behind. Ahead lay something he hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. Months after the divorce was finalized, an unmarked envelope appeared in Chad's mailbox. At first, he thought nothing of it, tossing it on the kitchen counter with the rest of the day's mail. But later that evening, as he sifted through the pile, the handwriting caught his attention. It was Kathy's. He stared at the envelope for a long moment before opening it. Inside was a handwritten letter, the words shaky but deliberate. "Chad, I don't know where to start, so I'll just say I'm sorry. For everything. For the lies, the betrayal, the destruction. I never meant to hurt you the way I did. But I see now that my intentions don't matter. My actions did, and they hurt you deeply. You didn't deserve that. Kathy's letter detailed her regrets, acknowledging the pain she had caused and taking responsibility for her choices. She admitted to letting her selfishness cloud her judgment and ruining what could have been a good life together. You were a good man, Chad, better than I deserved. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know that I see it all clearly now. I hope you find happiness. You deserve it. Chad set the letter down, his emotions steady but distant. It was too late for apologies. The scars Kathy had left were a reminder of what he had endured and overcome. He wasn't angry anymore, but neither was he moved to respond. Some bridges are better left burned, he muttered to himself, folding the letter neatly and placing it back in the envelope. Randall made his way to his office. Rather than revisit the pain, Chad chose to focus on the present, the life he was building, the peace he had found, and the people who genuinely cared for him. Kathy's apology was her burden to carry, not his to absolve. He placed the envelope in a drawer, not out of sentimentality, but as a quiet marker of the past he had finally left behind. As the months passed, Chad and Maria's connection deepened, built on a foundation of trust, understanding, and shared moments that felt effortlessly natural. Unlike the turbulent relationships of Chad's past, being with Maria was refreshingly simple. She didn't just see him, she valued him, scars and all. One crisp autumn afternoon, the two were in the garden behind Chad's house, planting bulbs that Maria insisted would bloom beautifully in the spring. She knelt in the dirt, her hair falling loosely around her face as she laughed at Chad's clumsy attempts to dig. "You're better at spreadsheets than spades," she teased, grinning up at him. "Hey," Chad replied with mock indignation, wiping his forehead with his sleeve. "I'm learning. You're the expert gardener here." Their banter was light, filled with warmth that felt like a salve to Chad's once wounded soul. It was in these small, ordinary moments that he realized just how much Maria had become a part of his life. Where there had once been chaos, there was now peace and hope. A few weeks later, Maria invited Chad to her favorite cafe. She seemed nervous, but excited, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her mug as she tried to find the right words. "There's something I need to tell you," she began, her tone serious but her smile betraying her happiness. Chad leaned forward, his brow furrowing slightly. "You're starting to scare me. What's going on?" Maria reached into her bag and pulled out a small rectangular piece of paper. She slid it across the table, her smile growing as Chad picked it up. It was a sonogram image, unmistakable in its clarity. "We are having twins," Maria said softly, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. Chad blinked, staring at the image, then back at Maria. For a moment he was speechless, his mind struggling to process the enormity of her words. Then, slowly, a grin spread across his face, his eyes lighting up with a mix of joy and disbelief. "Twins?" he finally said, shaking his head in mock exasperation. "I'm ready for double the trouble." Maria laughed, tears welling in her eyes as she reached for his hand. "You'll be amazing, Chad. I know it." Chad squeezed her hand, his heart full in a way he hadn't felt in years. For the first time in what seemed like forever, the future wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace, with Maria by his side and the promise of a family to come. As they left the cafe, the world seemed brighter, the possibilities endless. Together, they were stepping into a new chapter, one filled with challenges, yes, but also with love, laughter, and the kind of happiness Chad had thought was lost to him forever. It was a quiet afternoon when Chad received an unexpected knock at his door. Opening it, he found Tyrone standing on the porch, a worn envelope in his hand. The awkwardness between them was palpable, but Tyrone's expression was resolute. "I know I'm the last person you want to see," Tyrone began, his tone sincere. "But there's something I need to do before I can move on." Chad crossed his arms, wary but willing to hear him out. "What is it, Tyrone?" Tyrone extended the envelope toward him. "Your share of the lottery winnings," he said simply. I couldn't keep it, knowing how much you've been through because of all this. Chad stared at the envelope, then back at Tyrone. Why now? He asked, his voice steady but tinged with curiosity. Tyrone exhaled deeply, his shoulders sagging slightly. Because it's the right thing to do. Kathy dragged both of us into her mess, and I've already taken enough from you without even realizing it. This isn't about guilt. It's about closure. Chad hesitated for a moment before taking the envelope. Inside was a check with his name on it, the amount enough to make anyone pause. He looked up at Tyrone, his expression unreadable. You didn't have to do this, Chad said finally. I know, Tyrone replied, managing a faint smile. But I wanted to. Maybe it's selfish, but I needed to set things right, at least in some small way. For the first time, Chad saw a glimpse of the man Tyrone might have been outside of Kathy's influence. He nodded, extending his hand. Thanks. Tyrone shook it, his grip firm but brief. Take care of yourself, Chad. I hope this helps you move forward. As Tyrone walked away, Chad stood on the porch, the envelope in his hand and a strange sense of closure settling over him. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the acknowledgement, the unexpected gesture of goodwill that marked the end of a painful chapter. Stepping back inside, Chad placed the envelope on the counter and smiled faintly. The future was looking brighter, and for once, the past no longer held him back. Sitting on the porch one quiet evening, Chad watched the golden hues of the sunset spread across the sky. The air was crisp, carrying with it the scent of freshly fallen leaves. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace that wasn't fleeting, but steady, grounded. He thought back to everything he had endured, the lies, the heartbreak, the legal battles. There had been moments when he felt like giving up, when the weight of betrayal threatened to pull him under. But each time he'd found a way to rise, to push forward even when it felt impossible. Resilience, he realized, wasn't about pretending everything was fine. It was about facing the pain head-on and finding the strength to heal, no matter how long it took. Growth didn't come from avoiding challenges. It came from enduring them, learning from them, and emerging stronger. His gaze shifted to the garden where Maria was tending to the plants they'd nurtured together. Her laughter drifted through the air, soft and warm, and he couldn't help but smile. She had been his anchor in the storm, a reminder that hope still existed, even in the darkest moments. The future felt wide open now, filled with possibilities he hadn't dared to imagine. With Maria by his side and the promise of a family on the horizon, Chad finally understood that life's detours often led to unexpected blessings. He leaned back in his chair, a contented sigh escaping his lips. Life doesn't always go as planned, he murmured to himself, the words feeling like a quiet truth. But sometimes, it works out better than you imagined. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Chad let the moment settle over him, a quiet reminder of how far he'd come. The past no longer defined him. It had shaped him, yes, but it no longer held him captive. The road ahead was his to walk, and for the first time in a long time, he looked forward to every step.